One of the things that I am challenged by every time we come to this Sunday, in particular of all Sundays, is recognizing that the Easter story then and now really doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I mean, if you think about it, it really doesn't. And it really did not make sense 2,000 years ago when it first happened. The first thing that doesn't, first of all, it's tempting at Easter to just read that kind of last part of Luke about the ultimate empty tomb. But as usually is the case, you kind of need to back up to really understand what's going on. So we included the reading about the burial because there's a couple of things in there that, for those of us who know the story, are probably fairly, things we understand, but we should have some questions about. First of all, who are all these people, right? Like, Joseph is not a character. Joseph of Arimathea, the one who actually buries Jesus, is not a character that has been introduced into the story thus far. Right? If we were in the final 20 minutes of some blockbuster movie and they inserted a random character to do something important at the end, right, we would object. Be like, hold on, you can't just put that person in the end to do something important. Where were they for the rest of the story? Well, we don't know. This is the first and only time that Joseph shows up, and he shows up to do something really important. Obviously, he shows up to actually bury Jesus. He is not who you expect to see. Jesus has been palling around and has been moving through the community and teaching and hanging out with 12 other people along with a lot more others for many, many years now. And so the question you need to ask yourself, and that I ask myself when we read this, is where are all those people, right? Why is there this new person here doing something that's so important? Why does it fall to the stranger and the women, the people who were the most outside, to now do the most important thing of all? That, to us and to them, doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, of course, if we keep reading, and we should, because we're on Easter, is we read where the story goes. Right? And of course, the story goes, after that thing that doesn't make sense, we end up with the next thing that is a bit of a surprise to us, which is that while Jesus was in the tomb, he didn't stay there. And when the women do show up to do the thing that they're supposed to do, give him kind of the first century version of last rites, he's not there anymore. This is a big, big surprise to them. It's a big, big surprise to the 11 that Jesus has been hanging out with. And it seems to be a big surprise to pretty much everybody. Now, the angels in this scene, of course, say, I don't understand why you were surprised. We told you this was going to happen. And yet, they are. Now, sometimes when we encounter stories, it is easy to see things coming. And oftentimes, it's fun to have some surprises in there that keep us guessing, right? Some of the best stories have these sort of surprise moments towards the end that change something important and change an expectation. Some of them, though, you can't see coming, like this one. I'm sorry, but there was no hint that Vader was his father in the first movie and a half. George Lucas, I love you, but I cry foul. Sometimes the surprise is a little easier to see coming, and you kind of wonder how they didn't know that this was coming, like this one. Give me a break, the monkeys are all speaking English. Of course you're still on the same planet. I love you, Charlton Heston, but give me a break. All right. Stories have surprises, and we love surprises because they keep us guessing, and the good surprise will change what we understood or what we believed. It will change how it will reframe the experience we just have and change how we thought about everything that we just went through. A good surprise will typically reveal a truth that at the time feels counterintuitive. The truth is, Easter is counterintuitive. Easter is a surprise because it's not what everyone expected, because it's not what happened, and it's not how things worked. One of the things that people knew, and definitely knew then and understood then, there was a truth that they all knew and understood. One of those things everybody knows, and one of those things that everybody knows is that gods don't die. And yet, here we have the example of Jesus. Now, in Jesus' time and in Jesus' place, there were all sorts of religious traditions that had all sorts of gods associated with them, but one of the things that was consistent throughout is that gods lived and gods lived forever. And here Jesus is doing something very counterintuitive and very different. Jesus is doing a different thing. In fact, he is a whole new thing. But the people of the time can fall into the same trap that we fall into from time to time, which is not questioning those things that everybody knows. Everybody knows this, that, or the other. At the time Jesus was alive, and actually far and many, many centuries after that, there were many things that everybody knew. One of the things that everybody knew at that time was that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects, right? Yeah, I know. My daughter is over here like, yes, you've had fourth grade science and you know that's incorrect, but we're getting there, so hold on. All right. But everybody knew that. Why did everybody know that? Because none other than Aristotle himself said that's the way the world works. And nobody thought to question it, and nobody thought to try it out, and everyone just continued to do and believe what everybody knew. Until someone else came along, and his name was Galileo. Galileo decided to put to good use this tower that they had built in Pisa that started to lean. If you don't know, that tower has been leaning for about 600 years now, and it started to lean fairly early on. And what Galileo discovered is like, well, this is interesting. It hasn't fallen over, which is good. And he's like, and maybe I can make some good use out of this. So he went up there with a really, really heavy ball and a less heavy ball, and he dropped them both off the side as a bit of an experiment to demonstrate the actual truth, which is different than the thing that everybody knows. And of course, the actual truth is, it doesn't matter how much something weighs. Everything falls at the same rate, assuming you take air resistance out of it, and I know that. My engineer heart wants to explain this so much more, and I'm going to really try to hold myself back, right? But a sufficiently heavy object will fall at the same rate as even a more heavy object because that's just how things work. Now, we know that. We know that today because most of us had fourth grade science where they remind us and teach us that. And yet, at the same time, we're willing to not remember that time and time again, because how many times in movies have we seen one person fall off something high and another person jump after them and somehow catch them? If somebody falls off something high, don't jump after them. You're not going to catch them. Galileo says so, physics says so, God says so. Stay on the tower, stay in the plane. All right. Little tip. I'm not sure it's ever going to come up for you, but if it does, you'll be prepared. We have to be careful with those things that everybody knows because they can lead us into a trap of forgetting who it is that we are and where it is that we are. I've been reading this book called The Infinite Game, and it's a business book by an author I've read before. And the truth is, I like to read business books, and I actually read a lot more business books than I do church books, because in my experience, church books are all about 5 years behind all the business books, because there's more money in business than there is in the church. Hate to break it to you there. None of us do this to get rich. So I've been reading this book called The Infinite Game, and one of the things, the idea of the book that actually struck me as interesting in that it is a business book for business people, is the whole theme and central idea of the book is that every organization, company or otherwise, needs to have a just cause. And it's that where it starts to sound a little less like a business book and a little more like something that I would read in my life. And the author goes and talks about this idea of that organizations, companies, whatever, need to have a just cause. They need to have something that they stand for, something they are trying to accomplish that is more than just making money. And one of the examples that he lifts up is Kodak. Now, Kodak is a centuries-old company, and it started with a pretty just cause. Kodak is one of those companies, too, that we all know. Well, my children might not. We'll get there. But most of us in this room know Kodak. And they started at a time when photography was only for the professionals and photography was really hard. It involved a lot of toxic chemicals, a lot of technique and skill. It was very, very expensive. It was something that most people, if you had one family picture, in your possession, that was a pretty big deal, because when photography came out, it was almost as expensive to get a picture taken as it was to get your portrait painted. And there were actually more people painting portraits than there were taking pictures. So Kodak came along and said, what if we could imagine it differently? And what if everybody, and this sounds crazy to us today, what if everybody could take pictures easy and conveniently? And he had to invent some pretty important technologies like film. Before that, it was all glass plates. And he had to invent different ways of developing and different techniques for creating pictures. And he did that. And he's like, and the whole point was, what if this was something, an ability, a technology that was open to all? That was his cause. He wanted everybody to be able to capture the moments of their lives, whatever it is they happened, in a way so that we could go back and remember how life was, and remember those that we had lost, remember the times that were good. So Kodak started out with that cause, and over the years and decades and decades and decades, the company got better and better and better at it and invented most of the things that we know of as photography. Now, of course, why don't my children likely know who Kodak is? Because in today's world, Kodak is just a small little niche player. And when my children think about cameras, they probably think about cameras attached to their phones, first and foremost. And truthfully, so do I. Now, the story that generally gets heard, and the thing that most people know, is that Kodak and its film business and all that was made obsolete by things like digital photography. And that it's a sad story, but it's just one of those things that happens, right? That sometimes a technology comes along and it makes other things obsolete. And that may be the thing that most of us know about that story. But it is not the whole story, and it's not the way things had to be. Because in fact, Kodak invented the digital camera. Kodak invented the digital camera in the 1970s. Kodak held the patents on it for years. When people and other companies started to make digital cameras that you and I would buy, when they started integrating them into cell phones and things like that, for a long time, those companies had to pay royalties to Kodak because they held the patents, while Kodak continued to make film and paper and all those things that most of us don't use today. So what's the problem? Did Kodak get left behind, or did they forget their cause? Because if their cause was to make sure everybody had the ability to take good quality pictures and preserve those important moments in life, then it becomes fairly clear, anyone can see, that digital photography is a great tool for that to do that. Now, the problem is, it upends everything else they knew how to do. There are countless examples, maybe not millions, there are countless examples of this happening. We start something gets started with a good cause and for a great reason, and then over time, the thing that we do becomes the thing that we do, and the things everybody knows becomes the things everybody knows, and one of those things that everybody knows is people want paper copies of their pictures. How many of us have gotten a paper copy of a picture in the last year? That's not bad, actually. We have to be careful. I'm good, thank you. My wife's like, we just got some. I'm like, oops. All right. To mail to my mother-in-law, to be fair. All right. We have to be careful of the things that everybody knows, because what it can do is it can help us forget what our cause is. Because everybody knew how gods were supposed to act, they failed to see and were surprised by what Jesus was actually doing. Because Jesus was not following the path of everybody else. Jesus was not following the path that everybody knows. Jesus was following a different path to a different place, and a place that we needed him to go. Now, there are a lot of legitimate criticisms that people will have of the church. It's one of the reasons I very rarely tell strangers I'm a pastor, because you usually get one of two responses. Either they end up telling you all of their cares and all of their troubles, and you have this crying stranger in front of you, or worse yet, cutting your hair, which has happened to me on multiple times. It's a little disconcerting. Or you hear about all of the places and all of the ways that the church has let people down or let them down. And I'm the first to say the church has let people down. The church has failed to do what it's called to do. The church as a whole and the church for 2,000 years has struggled with that. And when we fail, and when we fail to live up to what we are meant to live up to, almost always is because we forgot our cause. We forgot and we stopped acting out of the thing that we exist to do, that we have and in fact do live out a just cause, in fact the justest of them all. It is easy, and it can be easy if we are not careful to turn Jesus into a narcissist. It's easy for us to take Jesus' actions when he went to the cross and then went into the tomb and then came out of the tomb as Jesus saying, hey, look at me, look how special I am. But of course, to do that is not to take the scripture seriously or the story seriously. Because while we certainly put the cross and Jesus at the center of our faith, the thing that we have to remember is that Jesus didn't do it for him. Jesus didn't die for him, and he didn't raise himself up for him so that everyone would go, look how great he is. Jesus did it for us. Jesus is different than we expect. Everybody knew how kings acted 2,000 years ago, and they called Jesus king, and yet Jesus acted very differently. Where kings were selfish and looking at themselves, Jesus looked at others. Everybody knew what messiahs did. They wanted a Messiah. They wanted a Moses. They wanted somebody who would lead them out into a new place. Jesus did something different. Jesus didn't act the way that they expected him to, or the way messiahs do. People knew what gods do. Gods are distant. Gods are indifferent. Gods don't care about people like you and me. Jesus came to do something different, to act differently, not to tell us that God is far away, but help us to remember that God is close, and in fact as close as anything can be. We are the people of the cross and the empty tomb. We are the people who would have inherited Jesus' just cause and are called to continue to do the same. And of course, the cause that we are continuing to live out is the cause that Jesus himself had. The message that we proclaim is the same message that Jesus had. And it's the thing we come back to over and over and over again around here because there just simply isn't any other words to describe it. We are here to love God, love our neighbor, and love ourselves. We are here, and our cause is to make sure that people know that that is true. To no longer live in that place of everybody knows this is the way that it is, when God came to tell us a different way. A way where God's love is at the center of our lives, where we do what we can to love our neighbors, and that we are reminded that we ought love ourselves because God loves us first. That is the message of Easter. That is the just cause that we are about. And we are blessed to be part of a community that I think understands that. We are not perfect here. If you're looking for perfect people, I will invite you to look around to the people sitting with you and understand that that's not them. And it's not me either. A just cause is one that keeps going and growing. In fact, the most important just causes can never actually be achieved. It's just something we continue to strive for. So as God's people and in God's place on this day amongst all days, we strive to do that. We strive to love God a little more, love our neighbor a little more, love ourselves a little more, because God loved us first. That is what we know, and that is what we proclaim. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen.